Thanks, everyone. Sometimes when people bring attention to the breath, rather than making them or helping them calm down, it's actually anxiety provoking. Sometimes that happens. I've seen it often in my practice as a psychologist. If that's the case for you, all you need to do is bring your attention to something outside your body. Could be sounds, or open your eyes and look at something. But you can still maintain a presence, you can still maintain mindfulness. So I'm just letting you know that, just in case for you the breath doesn't work. I started to learn meditation about 40 years ago, and it took me about 10 years to get used to mindfulness of breath. It was always kind of tricky. It's like I had a shortness of breath for some reason, but I eventually worked through it. Okay. So if you remember last week, we talked about mindfulness, and the description of mindfulness that we used was remembering to be attentive to immediate experience with care and discernment. I think that's what that says, yeah? Yeah. And that experience of mindfulness that we talked about, I gave a bit of a rationale about it, but I think from experience we could start to see that when we can be mindful, present, it short-circuits the tendency to get caught up in ruminative thoughts, which are thoughts about the past or difficult situations that are happening in our current circumstances, and also worrying thoughts. But also a general type of mental proliferation. Now, I didn't mention this word last week. Did I mention mental proliferation last week? Did I mention that? Mental proliferation is a translation of a Pali word called papancha. Papancha is the tendency for the mind to run wild with its imagination. It's like you start with a thought and it continues and it continues and it continues. Actually, you start with a perception of something. You start to think about it, and that builds on to more thinking. Ends up, you start to have a reality that's separate from the actual reality. You start to create a reality with your thoughts, a world with your thoughts that is separate from what's actually happening. So I think it's a great word, papancha. It's sort of onomatopoeic in some respects. It's like, so you get the sense of the mind going like that. But it literally means mental proliferation. So when we talk about rumination, when we talk about worry, when we talk about all sorts of thinking problems, we're talking about papancha. So when we can actually be present, it sort of brings us, it sort of helps us see these creations that we make with our thoughts for what they are, rather than being deceived by them as something else. They are just thoughts. They are just thoughts, and we can make a choice to believe them and buy into them, or we can make a choice to not buy into them. So that was a little bit what we talked about last week. I also mentioned the Eightfold Path, and I didn't put a slide up about it last week. We just talked about it. And mindfulness is in a context of a number of other factors. Mindfulness is a very powerful factor in being free, in being awake. Mindfulness is an enormously powerful factor to help us become present and therefore not perpetuate a whole bunch of proliferations into thinking. Yeah. So we established that, and the way mindfulness is described in contemporary psychology is often as if it's a separate factor, not dependent on other factors. But last week I explained that it's not a separate factor; it occurs within a context, and the context that it occurs within is a context of wisdom and wise behaviours, or another way you could describe wise behaviours is ethical actions. And this is what the Eightfold Path is. We have in the Eightfold Path right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort or energy, right mindfulness and right concentration. When I use the term right, I'm actually describing a Pali term called samma. And again, I'm not a Pali scholar, but I've hung out with some Pali scholars and picked up a few of these words, or the understanding of a few of these words. Samma, as far as I understand, means correct, accurate, complete. It means right versus wrong. Now, right versus wrong, sometimes I've said, right thought, right, right intention and so on. And people say, oh, you're being moralistic. I said, well, no, not really. And I've had this discussion with my friend Patrick. And Patrick used this example, so I'm crediting him for this example. It's like if I was to go, well, I've just come up from Lismore this afternoon. And when I got to Bangalore at about 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock, no, it's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I turned north. That was the right direction. If I'd turned south, I would have been going in the wrong direction. So that's how we understand this term samma. And right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness. It is going in the right direction for what we want to achieve. And the Eightfold Path is a path towards freedom, a path towards liberation, a path towards awakening. So when we practice in these ways, we are practicing in the right way. There is a way to practice wrong mindfulness and wrong concentration. And I'll give you an example. And these are the classic examples. This is a very classic example. A sniper about to kill someone. They need to be very, very mindful of what they're doing. Would you agree? And they need to be able to bring together mindfulness, which is remembering to be attentive, and also focus and attention. They need to have that in order to hit the mark, to be successful in their game, in their goal. Now, that's called wrong mindfulness, or miccha sati. Miccha is the term for wrong, and it's wrong because it's actually not leading to wisdom. Can you understand that? So, the way this works is that at a very basic level, it's like we might have an understanding that something's happening. We might look at something and get to understand a certain pattern in our lives, for example. We might be repeating a pattern that's not so helpful. So we sort of develop an understanding of something. And there you go, there's that understanding. We develop an understanding of how things work. And what we can do is we can make a decision or an intention or a resolve to act differently, rather than act like we've been doing before. Remember that saying that I said last week? When you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got, which was a saying from ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. When you see you're doing something that it's a pattern that you're stuck in, you make a decision. The decision is to do something different. So what you do then is you act in a way here with your speech, action and livelihood in a way that's consistent with your view and your intention. So when you're acting in a way that's consistent with that, your mind actually settles. What happens when we're kind of caught in destructive patterns? Our minds are not very settled. Do you ever, anybody notice that? Yeah. It's like we can't see really clearly. It's like we're sort of muddled. If by night I was teaching Dharma or teaching, meditation, but by day I was raping, pillaging and plundering, by the evening when I came to meditate, I probably wouldn't have a very settled mind, I don't think, you know. Like if I was acting really in a silly way, or a plain unethical way, when I would come to the evening to sit and meditate, my mind would be probably pretty unsettled. So what happens here is that you see something happening, you make an intention, then you act in a way that's helpful, a way that settles your mind, and that level of composure enables you to cultivate your mind. And this is the cultivation here. Cultivation is meditation. In the next slide, I think, I've talked about, I'm not sure, I think it's the next slide. Yes, it is the next slide. I've talked about how meditation is a translation of the word bhavana. Bhavana is a Pali word which means bringing into being. So, when we have this understanding, act in a way that's wise, our mind becomes settled, and we exert an energy, an effort. It's not like a struggling effort. It's not like a kind of tensed up effort. Here, effort means just a kind of resolve or a willingness to put energy in a particular direction. Like you guys right now are exerting a sort of energy towards paying attention to what I'm saying. It's not like a struggling effort. It's just this energy. This is called right energy because it's leading in a way, in a direction that's going to lead to helpful outcomes. So we apply some energy. Sometimes this energy is called courageous energy because sometimes we have to face up to something that's difficult, something about ourselves that we'd rather not look at. So it's often called courageous energy. Actually, the Pali for energy, I think, is virya. And the root of that Pali word, virya, for energy or effort, is vidhi. And I'm looking at my friend Yun Suk here to double check me. She's not a Pali scholar either, but she knows one very well. And I think the term vidhi, that root term is the same root term for the Pali word for courage. And it's interesting, isn't it, that we have those two words sort of similar to describe effort or energy. So I know that when I'm on meditation retreats or even when I'm just, on having a daily practice, sometimes it's kind of difficult to face up to what's going on. Sometimes it's difficult to turn my attention to my turmoil or my suffering or my, mental activity because I don't want to look at it. So it takes a lot of courage sometimes. When you can exert that, then you exert that with you start to cultivate mindfulness, which is remembering to bring attention to experience. And it's remembering to bring attention to experience with a kind of curiosity or inquiry. Then that coupled with concentration. Concentration is this when you bring your attention together and you let it focus. You bring it together and you focus it on one spot or one thing. It's like a bringing together of attention. It makes what you're looking at very clear. It settles your mind, it calms your mind, and it helps you see. It helps you see really powerfully. So when you see really powerfully, you develop understanding. Does that make sense? It's like when you look at something with attentiveness, with curiosity, with focus, you start to see how that thing works. And that's seeing how things work, seeing the cause-effect relationship for things, seeing the true nature of things, develops insight. And that's what wisdom is. Wisdom is the combination of insight or right view or right understanding and the right motivation or intention. Is that kind of clear? So I'm going to flick through some of these other ones. This is just that the translation of the word bhavana, which means to bring into being. But another way you can think about meditation is not only cultivating something, but also seeing something clearly, like awakening to something. Sometimes we exert effort to create something with meditation, to develop something. Other times we let things be and we allow our minds to open up to something and we just see it clearly. It's like a letting be. And there's two aspects to meditation, insight and serenity. I think we mentioned this last week, but I didn't have any slides to kind of help you with the visuals of this. So there are two aspects to meditation, and they are insight and serenity. With insight, what we tend to see, or what we tend to understand, is cause-effect relationships. We see when we do this, that results. You see how thoughts lead to emotions and how emotions lead to thoughts, or how actions lead to various consequences and so on and so forth. You start to kind of gather a database of the way life is. It's not only a database, but it's a kind of an understanding of what's going on. The other thing you develop is an understanding of the nature of things, which is that they are impermanent. And we mentioned this last week as well. Things are impermanent. They are also unable to give us ultimate satisfaction. Things that change are unable to give us ultimate happiness. Like, I really enjoyed this glass of water. It's really nice. But it is essentially unsatisfactory because it's not going to give me genuine happiness. It's not going to give me lasting happiness. It'll give me kind of a temporary hedonic happiness, but it's not going to, in and of itself, it's not going to give me a lasting happiness or a lasting peace. The other thing about it is that it's anatta. So we have the three. Let's go. Yeah, the three characteristics of existence. The three universal characteristics of existence. Anicca, what have I got there? Dukkha, anatta. Anicca means change, everything's changing. Dukkha means nothing's really certain. Nothing's a certain, surefire way of bringing ultimate happiness. Excuse me, I'm just going to have some temporary hedonic happiness. And things are anatta. Actually, the realization of anicca, dukkha, anatta, these three characteristics, which is what we start to develop insight about, is quite liberating. I mean, there's ultimate liberation, like seeing it completely, like an absolute kind of the nature of the world and nature oneself is this. There's also a kind of a relative freedom that we get from this, a relative happiness, I suppose. When you get caught up in a thinking pattern, for example, or something's happening that's not so pleasant, if you can understand that it's not going to last forever, it's actually quite freeing, isn't it? Yeah. The other thing is, so that's something about, difficult thoughts, emotions, situations don't last forever. And the other thing about dukkha, it really means that things are unreliable, things are uncertain. Now, I know this might be kind of a twisted way of looking at it, but one way you can think about your thoughts, like erroneous beliefs or really destructive thinking patterns, if you can see them as unreliable, as uncertain, you can actually see that they are not necessarily facts to be believed. So these thoughts that you're thinking, and I have people tell me every day, I'm a wash-up. Sometimes I have these really beautiful women saying, I just look terrible. I'm disgusting. Something like that. People have these beliefs about themselves and they believe them. People have these thoughts about themselves and the world, often hopeless, helpless, worthlessness, often kind of not in any way resembling the way the things actually are, and they believe them. So when they have a realization that those thoughts are not necessarily facts, there's a great sense of freedom. Okay, anatta, no thingness, no selfness, insubstantiability, insubstantiability, is that right? Yeah. Contingency or emptiness. Now this realization can be very liberating, even at a very relative level. When you're kind of in the midst of a really painful emotion, for example, we have this language about emotions and experience that indicates that we are actually those emotions. Like, if I was to ask any one of you how you are, you would respond, oh, I'm pretty good, I'm all right, or I'm peaceful, or I'm calm, I'm angry, I'm sad, whatever it is. Our language even says it. It's like we believe that's who we are. We believe that we are that emotion. But in fact, we are not that emotion. That emotion is a temporary event that arises and passes away, like a wave on the ocean. It's just has a build-up, has a peak, a crescendo. Sometimes we can get washed out by it, dumped by the wave, but it passes. But we believe that emotion is what we are. So if you can actually see that it is not who you are, it's not who you are, it is just an emotion, that is liberating. Can you see that? Can you understand that? Okay, so now we're coming on to, so insight meditation, as I explained last week, is this ability to, it's this quality of inquiry into something. It's questioning about what's going on here. How is it going on? You're not asking why it's going on, but you're asking what and how. And in that way of questioning and inquiring, you actually start to gain some insight. But the other meditation, the other type of meditation, or the other aspect of meditation, I should say, is the Serenity meditation. And the Serenity meditation, I've got this is my friend Patrick's slide, actually. And have I written it down here? No, I haven't. So Serenity meditations are based on concentration, or the unification of attention. Shamatha, or samadhi, is a term for concentration. And literally, this term refers to sam, which refers to with, towards, which is the A part of it. You can see this up on the screen there, which comes from, and the root word, the root suffix, is that right? Suffix, yeah. Root suffix to put or to place. So in other words, what happens with serenity or shamatha or samadhi is you draw your attention together and you put it in one place, focusing your attention. And often these types of meditations are also called calm meditation, tranquility meditation, shamatha meditation, samatha meditations. They're basically about stilling the heart, calming the body, calming the mind, and relaxing the body. They're about sort of stabilising and settling and chilling out. So with Serenity meditations, you don't necessarily inquire into what's going on. You just simply become absorbed into whatever you're paying attention to. You let yourself fall into it, sink into it. And when you can do that, it's like everything else falls away. You become completely absorbed in this, whatever you're bringing your attention to. Of course, that can happen in a negative way. You can become completely absorbed in your worries and ruminations, so that you become totally absorbed in them, and you become really anxious or upset. But in a positive way, you can shift your attention. You can choose to put where you want to put your attention, and you can focus your attention on one thing, And what happens is other things fall away. So if you're sort of having a lot of mental thinking and so on, if you put your attention into something that's not engaged with that, you won't buy into that stuff. You'll buy into whatever you're focusing your attention on. Does that make sense? Have I explained it clearly? Yeah. Maybe I'll explain it in one other way. There was a client in one of my groups years ago now, probably about 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, just in a group that I was running in Lismore. And I was talking about these ideas, and she said, I was talking about thoughts actually, and how we can buy into thoughts or we can not buy into them. We can engage with them or we can choose not to engage with them. And she said, oh, Malcolm, it's like what gets your attention gets you. Isn't that right? I said, absolutely. That's it. It's all about attention. It's all about where you put your attention. So samadhi is about attention and being flexible with attention and being able to focus it on one thing rather than a whole bunch of things. So serenity meditations tend to soothe, settle, calm. They ultimately lead to a really clear mind. So you can see clearly. Two analogies you can use for this kind of process. One analogy is like the jet stream. Like, you know how you get a hose and you know, with the sprays on the hose, if you can narrow the spray down to a focus, it gets really powerful. It can, wash away the leaves and the dirt and all sorts of other things. And another analogy for serenity meditation is like a snow dome, or like a muddy pool that's all stirred up. And if you let it still, if you let the pool be still, and you protect it from being stirred up, the mud and the silt will eventually settle, and the water will get really clear. And you can actually look inside the pool and you can see what's going on. Sometimes you see your precious jewels that you lost, and sometimes you see broken bottles and rusty cans of your life, and so on. Anyway, is those analogies meaningful? Yeah? Yeah. So with serenity meditation, the role of mindfulness, and I'm quoting Alan Wallace here, one of our teachers, refers to attending continuously to a familiar object without forgetfulness or distraction. And Bhikkhu Bodhi says mindfulness, which is this remembering to be attentive to what's going on, ensures that focused attention does not slip off and become lost in thought or other distractions. So mindfulness becomes like a monitors, yeah. I mean, there's a lot I can talk about. I think I mentioned the term sampajanya last week, didn't I? Can anybody remember what that was? Sampajanya? Clear comprehension. Yeah, that's another factor that comes into this, but I won't go into details about that right now. So, the serenity and insight understanding of meditation is as if it is as if meditation's on a spectrum. All meditation, whether it's insight or serenity, will have with it mindfulness and concentration and energy. So just if we remember the eightfold path, the cultivation was energy, mindfulness and concentration. Sometimes, some meditations, however, will have a tendency to be more mindfulness, like being present. And I think of some Zen meditations, for example, where people aren't really focusing on anything, you're just being present and being here now. Yeah, just this. You're really 360 degrees direction awareness. You're just very present. It's almost like you're at this end of the spectrum where mindfulness is emphasised and there's not much concentration is emphasised. The other end of the spectrum, the serenity end of the spectrum, unification or concentration is emphasised. but you still need mindfulness. You still also need concentration at this end of the spectrum. And so what happens here, all the different meditations we can have are somewhere along this spectrum. At this very end, you might get a shamatha practice, like a very highly concentrated state of attention. So everything else falls away and you're just focused on whatever you're focusing on. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yeah? I'm not talking into it, am I? You can see it? Yeah. All right, so these approaches to meditation, they kind of balance each other. You need serenity and insight in meditation practice in general. The serenity component tends to integrate and stabilise. It's based on sustained attention, focus on a single object. It stills the heart and it restores and rejuvenates. When you have a nice concentrated meditation, you actually feel really lovely, right? Shoulders get relaxed, face gets relaxed, you get really relaxed, your mind gets really clear. It actually becomes quite blissful. You know, you're breathing in bliss, breathing out bliss. Really lovely. The insight component, however, is more about dismantling versus integrating. It's like deconstructing an issue rather than kind of bringing it all together. You're kind of looking at the separate components of it. And mindfulness involves penetrative inquiry and questioning and inquiry into the experience and the characteristics of this experience. And mindfulness helps to develop understanding. So, you got those? Is that a bit clearer than, I just kind of brushed over these ideas last week. I hope this week I've made it a bit clearer because